With 2 levels down and 3 to go, my monsters and I had taken our foothold in the world of nightmares that was Zenith. Deciding what action to take next was more tense and difficult than ever before, but ultimately I had no way of knowing what the next levels would be like, or how. Well, my monsters would be prepared for them, so my only option was to guess. I tried to interpret what the icons of the next levels ahead of me were. The last level before the boss battle was obviously representing some type of volcanic area with lava and open flames. The middle icon I still didn't get, except for that it looks fleshy and vaguely like an organ of some kind. Oddly oversized as well. The one I was nearest to and about to enter next looked like thorny vines covering a puddle of blood. I guess this would be like the Blood River's chase level of dementia. As such, I went with Anguirus, because due to his rolling move, he'd be the fastest speed while submerged. The level in which I call Blood Lake looked like I expected. Rivers of blood accompanied by thorn-covered vines, which were scattered along the sides of the ground. The music was rather faint, but I could hear a distinct drum beat and a few other instruments. A lot of echoes, and sometimes it sounded like someone was hitting a drum underwater. I was disappointed to see that Anguirus was shrunk just like Godzilla and Mothra had been. Apparently all the Zenith levels would be like this. I felt less secure with my giant monsters no longer giant. I walked along without any interruption, for only a minute though, until my path had reached a dead end. There was a massive gap between the ground I was walking on and the ground to the right of the screen. I would have swum across and continued walking to the right, but due to a huge mass of brambles in the way, there was nowhere to go. 2 creatures with gliding membranes on their arms and tampery-like mouths were perched on outstretched vines and screeching at me, much like crows do to an invader of their territory. Another unnerving display of possible sentience by the creatures of this game, if it's even accurate to refer to them as being of the game, that is. I descended into blood, slowly sinking to the floor. Aquatic enemies were everywhere, and they were hard to avoid. The black shark in particular was very aggressive and hard to deal with, but thankfully I only encountered one. As the scene became more and more crowded, I swam up to the surface to find that it was littered with floating corpses. Creepy, but they're not a threat. Or so I thought. Until they all sprang to life and leaped on me. They were trying to pull me under, and they were draining my health as they did. They all attacked as a group, and when I got one off me, another one would jump on me from behind. I had to curl up into a ball and roll for them to loosen their grip. And when they did, I quickly retreated. It wasn't long before I had reached another land path. A note regarding the brambles. You can't stand on them, but it causes pain. And you can also destroy some of the vines, but only the thinner ones. I had to destroy multiple vines as well as dealing with more enemies. I was interrupted by a screen. This screen was only up for about 30 seconds. Then it went back to level. I was facing another dead end and a pregnant humanoid creature being hanged from the top of the right of the screen by an umbilical cord. Instantly, the creature's belly was split open from the inside, and the lower part of its body was ripped apart and fell into the river below. The Blood Lake's boss was revealed. It came flying towards me, making a shrill, hacking scream. I was forced to move back. The bat was highly immobile boss, fast and difficult to hit. As I moved back along the ground, the monster opened its mouth to shoot out a barrage of needles. I jumped over them and managed to give it a blow to the head, and it started flying out of my reach. As the bat was flying, it shot a stream of fire from its eye sockets. and started trying to hit me with the flames. I rolled along the ground, which drained my power, but put us at equal speed. The cycle repeated around 3 times until the monster was defeated. With most of my health drained, I went back to the edge of the level, and the large bramble vine blocking the exit was now gone. Now only had 2 levels to go. Who to send this time? Godzilla, Mothra, and Anguirus had all completed 1 level, leaving Solomon. And also this mysterious 5th monster. I tried to access it, but with no luck. I chose to use Godzilla again for this next level, and Solomon for the final one. The second to last level was what I referred to as the organic level, which was the most visually unpleasant of them all. Right from the start, I could see the graphics were freakishly different. The atmosphere was gruesome and foreboding. With the addition of loud, droning music, I was dreading what I would see in these levels. And it was only a few seconds before something did appear. 2 hideous things. It's hard to describe most of this level. Everything had the disturbing semi-real look to it. Most of the enemies look halfway between real animals and mishapen lumps of gore with teeth. It's also worth noting that all of them are considerably larger than Godzilla, and although the majority were not intelligent, each of them took 30 plus hits to kill. Due to this, it was a better idea to run away from them than fight, but it was never exactly clear what direction to run to. Well, most levels involve going to the right of the exit. The path of this level is primarily going down by walking to the edge of the one platform and jumping down to a lower one. There was no way to make sure that you were going the right way, nor any apparent means of getting back up to the higher platforms if necessary. Also, certain enemies acted as if they were aware you had to jump down and would stand at the lower edge of the platform, waiting for you. When this happened, I would have to walk back until the monster would leave. As I went on, I came across platforms stacked above each other in little space between, looking like a maze. This meant that I couldn't jump, and it made escape from enemies difficult. Thankfully, the only enemies able to fit in these mazes were the 4-legged beasts that I saw at the beginning of the level. Adding to the difficulty were long, tapeworm-esque monsters that would rise themselves up between platforms and trap you. The only attack they responded to was the heat beam, which only caused them to shrink back down. But this was costing even more power, and I couldn't afford to do without the heat beam for long. While trying to avoid the abominations that dwell in this level, I found out that you could stand idle in one place for too long. The ground tries to absorb your monster. I think it was about 4 minutes before the end of this level was making me sick physically. The tension was getting to me, and having to take in all these disgusting sights made me want to puke. I nearly did pause the game to go look for a bag, but I was able to hold it together, barely. I also found a trick at the end of the level, though it was too late to do me any real good. If 2 different species of monster run into each other face to face, they would fight each other and leave me alone. I didn't intentionally cause this, it just kinda happened. Finally, at the end, it was time for another boss fight. It was certainly ugly, yes, but not quite as horrific as I feared it to be. But more important than dealing with its appearance was defeating it. And since I had less than half my health bar to start with, there was no room for errors. It was attached to the floor when I first saw it, but after 10 hits, it detached from the floor and began floating. It moved fast, and unlike the Bud Legs boss, he was not impeded by any sort of gravity. It was even able to fly through the ground without any collision effect. It used this to its advantage, and would float beneath the ground and spring up randomly to bite at you. But it stopped doing this after a few well-aimed kicks to the face. The pink area on its upper jaw was a weak point. Too many hits there would cause a spasm uncontrollably. The new strategy was to rapidly float down while moving back and forth across the stage, trying to constantly keep its jaws aimed towards me. Health was getting critical at this point, and I spammed the heat beam, from which it had no defense. In the last stretch of the battle, the monster had lost its mind, rapidly rushing back and forth, gnashing its jaws. I had to duck under it, and then strike when its back was turned. 20 more hits, and it was destroyed. On to the last level of Zenith. I didn't hesitate. I selected Solomon and entered, perhaps a little too fast. This last level was definitely the peak of disconnect between what the NES was graphically capable of and what this game could create. The music also caught my attention. It was one of the only songs that appeared more than once, the horrible screeching from when the Hell Beast appeared in the graveyard. As soon as I started, there was already an enemy prepared to attack, a centaur wielding a whip, and it wasn't alone. When I started fighting, several more centaurs appeared, coming from both sides of the screen at the same time, and it was too much to handle. Solomon's fight saved me from taking too much damage at the start of the level. The centaurs followed after, but seemed to be unable to jump. After escaping the centaurs, I noticed gaps in the ground. While trying to avoid jumping sword-mouthed enemies in mid-flight, I got close to the surface of the lava, and the creature emerged and tried to grab me. It didn't succeed, but I was startled. Careful maneuvering would be needed to avoid instant death here. As new enemies appeared, the level soon became very difficult. A lot of trouble came from stocky red demons that stood on the top of the tall, narrow mountains and spewed fire. I got by them by waiting till their backs were turned and hitting them with a flying kick which made them fall into the lava. It was at this time I noticed that I wasn't gaining any health from killing enemies. Not all the ground was stable. At one point, the ground was reduced to small chunks that slowly drifted towards the right. Some of them would sink into lava upon landing on them, and there was no way to tell which ones would sink and which would not. Being so close to the lava added the threat of lava creatures, and this was very frustrating. I was also feeling very hot, which made concentrating hard. If you've ever had a heat rash, it felt similar to that. I had periodically stopped for water because of it. This was almost certainly due to the game, and not my imagination. But I kept pushing the thought out of my head. I didn't want to think about it. At the end of the stage, I encountered the boss, rising from the lava. Its arrival noted an ungodly howling roar. When it walked onto land, I saw just how gigantic it was, several times the size of Solomon. I was about to fly up and attack it when it opened its mouth and let out a huge blast of fire. I had to fly to dodge the flames, and then get close enough to the boss to fire a heat beam at its face, causing it to stumble backwards. If it didn't stumble backwards, it would have kept moving left until Solomon was forced in the lava, as there was no more ground within reach. The beast had to wait between uses of its fire breath, and it seemed to cost a great deal of energy. I used this time to attack it, but fire wasn't its only weapon, and I had to be wary of the monster swatting at me with its clawed hands. As its health decreased, it moved faster, and the battle felt like a tug-of-war between the two monsters over this bridge of land. After about 40 hits, it was defeated, tumbling backwards into the lava from whence it came. And then the final stage had been completed. At last it was down to 2 bosses and a final encounter with the Hell Beast. For some reason I thought Ghidorah would be easier to beat, so I confronted him first. The classic Ghidorah battle music from the original game started up, and I was faced against the new King Ghidorah. King Ghidorah was as powerful and unrelenting as ever. He instantly lashed out with gravity beams, from which were more damaging than Godzilla's heat beam. It became a struggle of constantly beating Ghidorah at every opportunity to keep him from using this attack. But Ghidorah soon saw through my tactic and started using physical attacks as well. He would strike with each of his necks, knocking me backward and making it impossible to get close enough to punch him. But I had an idea: to wait for him to lunge one of his heads and immediately blast it with the heat beam. It worked, and to my surprise the heat beam had actually obliterated Ghidorah's middle head. It was only a few seconds though before I realized what this would lead to, and sure enough, King Ghidorah was using the power of the glitch to transform into Mecha King Ghidorah. But what really shocked me was the sudden change in music. I had heard it before, but it wasn't the original NES game. It was the game Super Godzilla during the Mecha King Ghidorah fight. Mecha King Ghidorah's first attacks was its most deadly, the machine hand, which is very similar to Gigan's Saw. It immobilizes the monster and rapidly drains the health bar. Fortunately, before Ghidorah could do a lot of damage, the timer ran out. I would need to defeat Mecha King Ghidorah quickly to prevent him from using the machine hand, so I sent Solomon in to fight him. The two monsters were evenly matched in strength, but Solomon was faster, and by slashing and heat beaming without pause, the cyborg monster soon met its end. With Ghidorah defeated, I was returned to the board. I now outnumbered the enemy's 4 monsters to 1. Victory seemed to be soon at hand. The base icon had changed to a blood-red color. I could feel hate emanating from it. I started the fight against Destroya and Anguirus, and the music was the same as Ghidorah's. But when the fight first began, Destroya was in microscopic form. After one hit, it changed to a juvenile, which had few attacks, and was also dealt with easily. The fight became serious once Destroya entered his aggregate form, gaining the use of large arms and micro-oxygen beam. Anguirus' roll attack, which had been very useful up until now, was rendered useless by Destroya, constantly attacking me with his large arms when I tried to use it. For this part of the fight, I had to rely on brute strength. Just before the time ran out, Destroya had changed into his flying form, which Anguirus was ill-suited to fight against. Going back in, I fought against flying form with Mothra, which seems fitting. Mothra was weaker than Anguirus, but was much better equipped to dodge and counter flying Destroya's attacks, so the fight was now in my favor. However, Mecha King Ghidorah fight music started, and Destroya changed into his final form sooner than expected, which drastically turned the tables. Mothra's attacks did very little to Destroya, and I had to move furiously to avoid damage while waiting for the timer to run out. Even though it would be near impossible to beat Destroya with Mothra, I still had 3 other monsters. Final form Destroya was very resistant to taking damage, and the heavily armored foe would not be defeated without a long fight. In the last part of the fight, I wasn't using much strategy, just attacking as brutally and as fast as I could. On its last bar of health, Destroya tried one last counterattack, a beam of energy from its chest. I don't know how powerful it would have been, because just before it could fire, I punched Destroya in the chest cavity, destroying him. And that was it. The last kaiju boss was gone. In the midst of all the excitement, I had briefly forgotten there was one last thing to do before the game was over. Seeing the icon again hit me like a ton of bricks. I froze for a few seconds. I'd come so far to get to this point, but I was so terrified. I really did not want to know what the last encounter was going to be like. Before I could let myself think about it any longer, I moved Godzilla and began the stage. You're here now. This is the end. Just one thing, and then it's all over. And when the screen changed, there was nothing. Godzilla and a black screen. I walked back and forth, fired a heat beam. Nothing happened until I heard something. The faint sound of a familiar drum beat.